You know what separates the truly powerful from everyone else? It's not what they say, it's what they don't say. I learned this the hard way. And today, I'm going to share with you something that changed the way I live, lead, and think forever, the hidden power of silence. But before I dive in, let me tell you something that will reshape how you see yourself and the world around you. The person who masters silence masters destiny. I used to be the one who had something to say about everything. Every debate, every meeting, every argument, I was there, defending my opinion, explaining my side, desperate to be understood. I thought that by speaking more, I'd appear smarter, stronger, more confident. But the truth hit me one day like a lightning bolt. The people I admired most, the ones who seemed unshakable, the ones who carried real power and respect, they were quiet. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they didn't need to say everything. When they finally spoke, people stopped and listened. That's when I realized that words are like currency. The more you spend, the less they're worth. Think about it. We live in a world where everyone is shouting. Everyone wants to be seen, heard, and validated. Social media is a competition of voices who can be louder, faster, more opinionated. But in that storm of noise, what if your silence could be the loudest sound in the room? What if you could influence not by reacting, but by remaining still? Silence, when mastered, becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes the presence of power. The ability to choose when not to speak is a form of emotional intelligence most people never develop. And once you do, everything changes. The first situation where silence becomes your weapon is when someone tries to provoke you. I call this the trap of emotional reaction. Picture this: someone insults you, questions your competence, or throws subtle jabs designed to pull you into their emotional storm. Your body tenses, your heart races, your ego wants to fight back to prove them wrong. That's the moment most people lose their power, because when you react, you hand them control. They push a button and you respond exactly how they expected. You become predictable, and predictable people are easy to manipulate. But when you stay silent and when you refuse to give them what they want, something incredible happens. You take the power back. Your silence becomes unsettling. They start to wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, why you're not reacting. Their confidence cracks. They lose their rhythm. And in that gap of uncertainty, you've already won. I remember a meeting early in my career where a competitor tried to embarrass me in front of a group of executives. He brought up one of my past failures, twisting the story to make me look careless. The old me would have jumped in, defended myself, justified every detail. But instead I looked at him, smiled, and said nothing. I continued my presentation as if nothing had happened. The room fell silent, uncomfortable, tense, waiting for me to retaliate, but I didn't. I simply finished strong and walked out with calm composure. 2 hours later, I received a call from one of the executives. He said, "The way you handled that situation spoke louder than any words could have. You've got my respect." That moment changed my entire approach to communication. You see, silence communicates confidence. It says, I don't need to defend myself because truth doesn't need a lawyer. It shows maturity, it shows control. It's the difference between reacting emotionally and responding spiritually. The second moment where silence becomes strength is when you're in the presence of someone's pain. This is where most of us fail without realizing it. When someone opens up about their struggles, we rush to fill the silence. We give advice, tell stories, try to fix them. But in doing so, we steal what they actually need: space. Sometimes the greatest healing doesn't come from words, but from being heard. I learned this with a close friend who went through a difficult season. Every time we talked, I tried to comfort him with advice, with logic, with stories. Until one day he said quietly, "I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to listen." That hit me. My words, though well-intentioned, were drowning out his need to be understood. From that day on, I learned to offer silent presence. Not silence that ignores, but silence that embraces. It's a silence that says, "I see you. I'm here. You're not alone." This kind of silence doesn't just build trust, it deepens connection. It's rare, sacred, and powerful. The kind of silence that can mend hearts and strengthen relationships without a single word spoken. And that brings us to the third situation, one that separates amateurs from masters: silence during negotiation. Whether it's a business deal, a salary discussion, or even a personal boundary, the person who breaks the silence first almost always loses leverage. When you make your offer or state your position, stop talking. Let the silence do the work. Most people can't handle that tension. They start justifying, explaining, or lowering their own offer. But if you stay silent, you hold the power. I remember sitting in a negotiation where we presented our price higher than expected and then stopped. 10 seconds passed, 20, 45. It felt like forever, but we held our ground. Finally, the other side spoke. Maybe we can adjust a few terms. By the time they finished, we had secured nearly everything we wanted without uttering another word. That's when I understood something profound. Silence creates space for truth to emerge. It reveals character, exposes weakness, and amplifies strength. It's not passive, it's strategic. It's not emptiness, it's discipline. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. Silence isn't the absence of power, it's the refinement of it. When you stop talking, you start observing. When you stop reacting, you start perceiving. And in that perception, you gain insight that words could never give you. In a world obsessed with noise, the one who controls silence controls the atmosphere. The one who can stay centered when others lose composure commands the room. That's the paradox. True power doesn't shout. It stands still, and the world listens. There's another battlefield where silence becomes your greatest armor. The kind of silence that doesn't defend, but defines. It's the silence you keep when the room around you begins to feed on gossip. We all know that moment. You're sitting with a group, laughter floating in the air, and then someone brings up a name that isn't there to defend itself. The tone shifts, the jokes turn sharp. Suddenly, the conversation becomes less about truth and more about entertainment. And in that moment, your silence becomes a statement. Most people don't realize how destructive that kind of conversation is until it turns against them. Gossip is like smoke. It moves fast, invisible at first, but soon it fills every corner of your reputation. When you stay silent, not in awkwardness, but in integrity, something powerful happens. You show that your loyalty isn't conditional. You prove that you can be trusted even when no one's watching. But here's the trap. If you speak up, you risk sounding self-righteous. If you participate, you lower yourself to the level of those feeding on other people's flaws. The answer is not confrontation, but composure. The kind of silence that doesn't fuel the fire, but slowly lets it die out. I've been in rooms where gossip spread like wildfire. Executives mocking someone's mistake, friends tearing apart someone's choices. At first, I used to laugh along, afraid that my silence would make me look distant. But over time, I learned that the ones who laughed loudest were often the least respected. Your silence in these moments builds something rare, credibility, the quiet kind of respect that cannot be bought or demanded, the kind that grows slowly, one decision at a time. When people realize you're not the type to carry stories, they start trusting you with truth. And trust, once earned through silence, becomes the most valuable currency in any relationship, business, or life. Then comes the fifth situation, a different kind of silence. Not one born from restraint, but from hunger. The silence of learning. We live in a time where everyone wants to sound smart, where people listen just long enough to respond. But those who truly rise are the ones who listen to understand. Real learning doesn't happen in noise. It happens in quiet rooms, in humble moments, in spaces where your ego takes a step back and your curiosity takes the lead. I've met people who spoke endlessly about what they knew, but I've also met a few who spoke little, and when they did, every word carried weight. They were listeners, observers. They noticed what others missed because they weren't busy trying to prove they were paying attention. They were simply present. Silence during learning is not passivity, it's precision. It's the discipline of holding your tongue long enough to absorb the full picture. When you stop trying to be impressive, you start becoming wise. You start hearing what's not being said, the hesitation in someone's voice, the unspoken truth between their words. the emotion behind their logic. These subtleties reveal more than any sentence ever could. When I started practicing this, my world changed. In seminars, I stopped raising my hand at every point. In conversations, I stopped waiting for my turn to speak. And what happened was profound. I started seeing people, not just hearing them. I caught details others overlooked, patterns that connected everything. And that awareness became the foundation of every success I've built. It's easy to talk. It's hard to listen. But the moment you embrace silence as a student, life itself becomes your teacher. Every conversation turns into a classroom. Every failure becomes a lesson. Every silence becomes a seed that grows into understanding. And there's something deeper beneath this. Silence teaches humility, because when you stop talking, you realize how much there still is to learn. You realize that wisdom doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. So if you want to grow, learn to stop performing knowledge and start embodying it. Let silence be your strategy. Because the loudest person in the room rarely has the most to say. The one who listens, absorbs, and waits, that's the one who leads. There's power in withholding words, in observing quietly as others reveal themselves through theirs. It's not manipulation, it's mastery, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to interrupt or argue, because truth, time, and silence always reveal everything. And when you understand this, something in you changes. You begin to carry yourself differently. You stop rushing to fill the air. You stop competing for attention. You begin to enjoy the calm that silence brings, the kind that doesn't seek approval but radiates assurance. Because when you're no longer threatened by silence, you've reached a level of peace that noise can't touch. That's the kind of silence that shapes leaders, heals relationships, and builds wisdom. The kind that doesn't hide, it reigns, and the world, though too noisy to understand it, can always feel its presence. There's a particular kind of silence that most people never experience, not because it's unreachable, but because it's uncomfortable. It's the silence that follows success. The moment after you've achieved something great, when the applause fades and the noise that once motivated you disappears. Most people rush to fill that silence. They post about their victory, announce their achievement, talk endlessly about what they've done. But true maturity begins when you resist that urge, when you learn to let your success breathe quietly before you broadcast it. I used to think sharing every win was a way to inspire others. I told myself I was celebrating hard work, showing gratitude, but deep down I was searching for validation, for someone to confirm what I already knew. Then one day, after reaching a milestone I had worked years for, I noticed something strange. I felt emptier after telling people than I did before. Their praise, while sincere, didn't satisfy me. It actually diluted the feeling I'd worked so hard to earn. That's when I understood something that changed how I saw achievement. When you speak too soon about what you've accomplished, you trade fulfillment for attention. Silence after success allows you to internalize what you've done, to feel it, own it, and understand it before the world does. It turns achievement into wisdom instead of noise. It's in that silence that you begin to see not just what you gained, but what it cost, what it taught, and what it means for what's next. There's a quiet strength in being the person who doesn't need to announce their every move. The kind of person whose results speak for them. When people find out about what you've done, long after it's been completed, the respect it earns is deeper, cleaner, more lasting. Because it comes without the shadow of performance. You weren't seeking recognition, you were pursuing purpose. I remember a conversation I once had with a mentor, a man who had built an empire quietly with no fanfare, no public image, no interviews. He told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Let them discover your success by accident. That's when they'll know it's real." And he was right. When success is hidden, it gains gravity. It becomes a story that spreads on its own, not because you told it, but because it couldn't be ignored. Silence after success also protects your spirit. When you make your wins public too quickly, you invite opinions, envy, expectations. You give people access to what should remain sacred, your process, your growth, your next step. But when you stay quiet, you keep your energy concentrated. You're no longer chasing approval, you're channeling focus. That's how momentum is built. Not in the noise of validation, but in the quiet rhythm of consistency. The world doesn't need to know what you're doing every time you make progress. Let your results speak for you when they're ready. Let your silence build curiosity. Let your humility amplify your greatness. Because real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists, steady, grounded, undeniable. And yet there's another moment where silence becomes even more necessary when you're angry. Anger is one of the loudest emotions we experience. It demands to be expressed, to be justified, to be released. But if you let anger speak for you, it will almost always say things your heart never meant. Every relationship broken, every opportunity lost, every regret that keeps people up at night, they often begin with words spoken in anger. When you speak while you're angry, you give temporary emotions permanent power. You turn moments into damage that no apology can fully undo. That's why mastering silence in anger isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's choosing not to let chaos write your story. I once made it a personal rule, never speak important words when I'm angry, tired, or afraid. Those emotions distort truth, and truth spoken through distortion becomes poison. So when I feel anger rising, I go quiet. I walk away. Breathe, let time separate my emotion from my decision. And without fail, when the silence settles, clarity arrives. I can finally see what's worth addressing and what's just my ego wanting to be right. People think silence in anger means suppression, but it's actually expansion. It's giving yourself room to feel without reacting. It's protecting what you've built from the heat of a single moment. Because once words leave your mouth, they no longer belong to you. They belong to interpretation. I've seen silence save marriages that were hanging by a thread. I've watched it preserve friendships, businesses, and reputations. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say nothing until your heart and your mind agree on what should be said. Silence in this sense is not about avoiding conflict. It's about approaching it with intelligence. It's about recognizing that not every battle deserves your energy. Not every argument needs your voice. And not every attack requires your defense. Sometimes silence is not surrender, it's strategy. It says, I choose peace over pride. I choose purpose over reaction. And in that choice, you don't lose ground, you gain it. Because power doesn't come from always being right. It comes from being rooted. And silence, more than any word, keeps you rooted. When you can stay still while the world expects you to explode, when you can hold your composure in moments others would fall apart, you become unshakable. That's what real strength looks like. Not noise, not argument, not dominance, but restraint. The quiet assurance that no one can pull you out of your peace without your permission. That's the kind of silence that doesn't just protect your success, it sustains it. Because power gained without discipline is temporary, but power guided by silence endures. There's a silence deeper than restraint, quieter than composure. A silence that doesn't protect you from the world, but connects you to yourself. It's the silence of introspection, the one that begins when all external voices fade and you're left with the only one that truly matters, your own. Most people never reach this kind of silence because they're afraid of what it might reveal. They fill their days with noise, constant scrolling, endless talking, perpetual distraction, because silence has a way of holding up a mirror, and when you finally stop running, that mirror doesn't lie. This kind of silence isn't empty, it's alive. It's a space where truth breathes. It's where clarity hides, waiting for you to be still enough to hear it. When you sit in that stillness long enough, something extraordinary happens. The noise of the world dissolves and a softer, wiser voice begins to speak. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It says, this is who you really are. This is what you really need. This is what you must let go of. I began practicing this silence out of exhaustion. My mind had become a storm, constant thoughts, endless decisions, too many opinions about everything and everyone. I was living loud, but thinking shallow. So I started a new routine. Every morning, before the phone, before the news, before the world could touch me, I sat alone in complete quiet. No music, no movement, just breath. The first few days were torture. My mind resisted it. It screamed for distraction, for noise, for something to fill the space. But then something began to shift. Beneath the chaos of thought, there was stillness. Beneath that stillness, there was guidance. It wasn't mystical. It was practical, clear, grounded, the kind of wisdom that had been there all along, buried under the weight of constant noise. It's in those silent moments that life starts speaking in its purest language. Ideas arrive effortlessly. Solutions to problems you've wrestled with for months surface as if they had been waiting for you to stop forcing them. You begin to notice patterns, not just in your circumstances, but in yourself. You start seeing how your habits, fears, and choices are connected. Silence doesn't give you answers. It shows you where to find them. There's a reason why the greatest thinkers, inventors, and spiritual leaders in history all practiced solitude. They understood that silence isn't a pause from life. It's the pulse of life. It's where vision is born. Every great idea, every act of creation starts in the quiet before the sound. But we live in a culture terrified of quiet. We mistake activity for progress, noise for importance, visibility for value. Yet the truth is the opposite. The more silent you become, the more focused you get. The more focused you get, the more effective you become. When you withdraw from noise, even for a short time, you begin to recover something modern life has stolen, the ability to hear yourself think. And that's not poetic, it's powerful. Because how can you live with purpose if you can't hear your own direction? How can you make decisions that align with who you are if you're always reacting to what everyone else is saying? I remember once being at a crossroads, standing between two paths that both looked right but felt different. Logic couldn't help me. Advice confused me. So I did what I'd learned to do. I got quiet. I took a few days away from screens, away from input, away from everyone's expectations. I sat in silence until the noise inside me settled. And in that stillness, the answer came. Not as a thought, but as a knowing. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, steady, and peaceful. And when I followed it, everything aligned. That's the gift of silence. It doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it simply reveals. And once you experience it, you begin to crave it, not as an escape, but as a necessity. You start realizing how drained you feel after too much noise, how much energy leaks from conversations that go nowhere, how cluttered your mind becomes when it's always reacting. Silence cleans that. It resets you. It gives you back to yourself. But here's something most people misunderstand. The silence of introspection isn't passive. It's not sitting still while life passes by. It's active awareness. It's the decision to tune out everything external so you can tune in to what's eternal. It's choosing to value stillness as much as motion, reflection as much as action. And that balance is where wisdom lives. In this silence, you meet yourself again, and not the version the world sees, but the one God created, the one that doesn't need applause to feel worthy or noise to feel alive. You remember that your worth was never in your words, your work, or your image. It was in your being. There's a moment, if you practice this long enough, when silence stops being uncomfortable and starts feeling like home. It becomes your sanctuary, a place you retreat to, not because you're hiding, but because you're recharging. The world will still be loud. It will still pull, demand, and distract, but you'll move through it differently. You'll respond from peace, not pressure. You'll speak with clarity instead of confusion. You'll act with purpose instead of impulse. Because when silence lives inside you, the noise outside loses its power. That's what the truly powerful understand. Silence isn't absence, it's alignment. It's where strength renews, focus returns, and purpose is reborn. It's not about escaping the world, it's about mastering how you move through it. So learn to retreat daily into that sacred quiet. Not for long, but long enough to hear what your life has been trying to tell you. Because every answer you've been searching for, every direction you've been begging for, every piece you've been chasing, it's already there. You just have to get quiet enough to listen. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just calm you, it changes the atmosphere around you. It's the silence of presence. The moment when you walk into a room and don't have to announce yourself because your energy already speaks. It's subtle but unmistakable. People feel it before they understand it. They sense something different. Composure without arrogance, calm without weakness, confidence without noise. That's the kind of silence that cannot be faked because it's born from inner order. Presence isn't about being the loudest or the most visible. It's about being anchored. It's about walking into chaos and not absorbing it. About standing among noise without letting it dictate your peace. When you carry silence within you, it becomes an invisible force. It steadies people, commands attention, and earns respect without a single word. I remember the first time I noticed this kind of presence. It wasn't in a celebrity or a speaker or someone famous. It was in a man who rarely spoke in meetings. He would sit, listen, and only speak when necessary. But when he did, the room leaned in, not because of his title, but because his silence had given his words weight. He never competed for attention. He didn't have to. He had cultivated a quiet authority, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and not needing anyone else to confirm it. That's the paradox of silence. The quieter you become, the louder your influence grows. Because people don't follow noise, they follow certainty. They follow peace. They follow the one person who isn't reacting to everything around them. You see, presence is the physical expression of inner silence. It's the overflow of a disciplined mind and a grounded heart. Most people try to gain influence through performance, through talking more, showing more, proving more. But presence is built through less talking, less proving, less needing. It's built through consistency, through the way you observe before acting, through the patience that others mistake for mystery. I've learned this in leadership more than anywhere else. True leadership isn't about controlling others, it's about mastering yourself. The leader who has cultivated silence doesn't make decisions from panic. They wait, they observe, and when they finally move, their action carries precision. Their calm becomes contagious. Their restraint becomes reassurance. People trust them because they trust their stillness. And that kind of stillness isn't something you put on like a performance. It's something you grow through practice, through the daily discipline of choosing peace over reaction, reflection over impulse, because presence is not a personality trait. It's a byproduct of spiritual balance. There's also a relational power to silence. The way you show up in conversations, in conflicts, in love, silence transforms all of it. Most people listen to respond. They listen with their mouths half open, already preparing their defense, their next point, their story. But the one who listens in silence creates a space others can't find anywhere else. When you give someone your full, quiet attention, they feel seen in a way they didn't know was possible. You're not just hearing their words, you're reading their soul. That's why people trust those who listen more than those who talk. Because in a world that moves too fast, silence feels like care. It feels like safety. And when you can make someone feel safe, you've earned something more valuable than admiration. You've earned connection. In arguments too, silence becomes your wisdom. Not the silence that punishes, but the one that protects peace. When you stop trying to win and start trying to understand, everything shifts. You stop feeding the fire that conflict wants to grow. You let the other person empty their emotions while you keep yours intact. And often that alone disarms them, because nothing diffuses tension like calm. Nothing confuses anger like silence that refuses to mirror it. But let's go deeper. The power of presence through silence doesn't just affect others. It transforms how you experience the world. When your mind is quiet, you notice details others miss. You sense the undercurrents in a room, the unspoken truths in people, the direction of moments before they happen. Silence sharpens perception. It turns awareness into intuition, and intuition, when developed, becomes foresight. You begin to navigate life with a kind of effortless wisdom, not because you know everything, but because you're listening to what most people ignore. The pauses, the hesitations, the invisible shifts that only silence can detect. That's what makes silent people seem almost prophetic. They aren't predicting the future, they're simply attuned to the present. And that kind of awareness creates power, because power at its core isn't about control, it's about clarity. The clearer you see, the wiser you act. and silence clears your vision. It's in this state of quiet presence that opportunities begin to reveal themselves. People start approaching you differently. You become someone others seek out, not for your noise, but for your calm. They want to borrow your stillness because it feels like stability in a spinning world. That's when you realize silence is more than a discipline. It's an identity. It's who you become when you've stopped being driven by the need to prove anything. It's what grows when your ego finally bows to purpose. It's the sound of alignment between your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. To live with this kind of silence is to move through life like deep water, steady, powerful, reflective. People can sense your depth without you needing to announce it. They respect your boundaries without you demanding it. They listen when you speak because they know you only speak when it matters. And the best part, you begin to enjoy the quiet itself. It stops feeling empty. It starts feeling like home. Because once you've learned to find strength in silence, you stop chasing attention. You stop seeking permission, and you start walking in authority. The world may keep shouting, competing, performing, but you'll stand still in the middle of it all, calm, clear, unshaken, because silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the mastery of it. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just calm your surroundings, it opens your perception. A silence so deep, it sharpens your intuition until you begin to see what others only sense. It's not mystical, it's disciplined awareness, the kind that grows in those who've learned to stop reacting long enough to understand what's really happening beneath the surface of things. Because silence, when practiced consistently, becomes a form of vision. It trains you to hear what isn't being said, to notice what others overlook, and to feel truth before it's spoken. We live in a generation addicted to noise, external and internal. The constant buzz of conversation, opinion, and urgency makes people blind to what's already unfolding right in front of them. They're too busy speaking to perceive, but silence creates space for clarity to enter. It's like cleaning the window of your mind. Suddenly, what looked foggy becomes transparent. You start to perceive intentions instead of just hearing words. You start sensing opportunities that others miss because they're too distracted chasing noise. I remember a moment early in my journey when I sat across a potential business partner. On paper, everything about him seemed perfect. The experience, the charm, the numbers. But as he talked, I felt something that words couldn't explain. My mind wanted to agree, but my spirit hesitated. So I stayed silent. I listened longer. I let the space between his sentences speak, and in that silence, I caught the inconsistency, the flicker in his eyes when he talked about profit, the subtle tension in his tone when he mentioned teamwork. My intuition spoke louder than his words, and I walked away from that deal. Months later, the company he built collapsed under deceit. That day I learned that silence isn't just a virtue, it's protection. When you cultivate silence, you begin to hear a higher frequency. Call it intuition, call it discernment, call it divine guidance. It's that quiet knowing that doesn't come from data or reason, but from alignment. It's not emotional impulse, it's spiritual awareness. The problem is, most people can't access it because they never slow down long enough to listen. They confuse busyness with progress, reaction with purpose, noise with direction, but silence reintroduces you to your own inner compass, the one that always knew the way if only you'd stop drowning it out. This kind of inner guidance isn't random. It's wisdom distilled from stillness, and the more you practice it, the sharper it becomes. You start recognizing patterns in people's energy, in opportunities, even in your own behavior. You can walk into a room and feel the atmosphere shift. You can sense when something is right or when something's off without needing an explanation. That's not magic, that's mastery. Silence teaches you to trust timing. When you're quiet, you stop forcing what isn't ready. You stop chasing things that don't align. You realize that not every open door leads to destiny, and not every delay means denial. Some things require stillness to unfold. Noise rushes, but silence waits. And in that waiting, life reveals what's meant for you. But intuition isn't only about avoiding wrong turns, it's about recognizing divine timing. There are seasons when silence tells you, not yet. and other moments when it whispers now. That sensitivity comes from practice, from sitting in stillness long enough that you begin to distinguish between fear's hesitation and wisdom's restraint. One freezes you, the other prepares you. Silence helps you tell the difference. In relationships, this intuitive silence becomes priceless. You stop listening just to reply and start listening to understand. You start hearing the emotions behind the words, the motives behind the gestures, the truth behind the tone. You realize that people communicate far more through their silence than through their speech. Sometimes the way someone pauses mid-sentence tells you more than their entire explanation. Silence helps you read those pauses. It gives you a language beyond words. And spiritually, silence becomes sacred. It's in quietness that you hear God's whispers, the direction, the comfort, the correction that never come through noise. The voice of truth rarely shouts. It speaks softly, waiting for you to tune in. Every person who has ever heard that still, small voice knows it only appears in quiet spaces, not in chaos, not in distraction, but in silence. That's why stillness isn't weakness, it's alignment. Once you've experienced this, your relationship with noise changes forever. You begin to crave clarity more than constant stimulation. You stop reacting to everything that demands your attention and start responding only to what deserves your energy. You no longer mistake movement for momentum. You understand that silence doesn't slow you down, it focuses you. The most powerful decisions I've ever made were made in silence. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but from a place of internal knowing. I've learned that if you have to talk yourself into something, it's probably not right. The truth doesn't need convincing. It just needs stillness to be recognized. That's the secret the world overlooks. Silence isn't the opposite of action. It's the foundation of it. Every decisive word, every bold move, every breakthrough idea is born in quiet reflection before it manifests in noise. The stronger your silence, the sharper your direction. But silence requires courage, because when everything slows down, you can't hide from yourself anymore. You start hearing the voices inside, the doubts, the insecurities, the unhealed parts. And most people run from that. But the brave ones stay. They sit through the discomfort until it turns into understanding. They face what the noise was distracting them from. And when they emerge, they don't just come out wiser, they come out freer. Freedom doesn't begin with words. It begins with stillness. The moment you stop running from your own thoughts and start listening to them with compassion, healing begins. Silence becomes the bridge between confusion and clarity, between chaos and peace. And that's what makes silence divine, not just because it connects you to God or truth, but because it reconnects you to yourself. It strips away the illusions, the noise, the false urgency. It brings you back to the quiet certainty that everything you need to know, everything you need to do, and everything you're meant to become is already inside you, waiting to be heard. There's a silence that doesn't just calm you, it builds you. A silence that doesn't escape the storm, but learns to stand in the middle of it without breaking. It's the silence of endurance, the kind that turns pain into patience and chaos into clarity. Because silence, when mastered, doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful. Life has a way of testing your stillness. Just when you think you've found peace, something happens that shakes the ground beneath your feet. Betrayal, loss, disappointment, uncertainty, and in those moments, silence stops being an idea and becomes a discipline. The question is no longer, can you stay quiet, but can you stay steady? Most people crumble when silence meets suffering. They want answers, explanations, noise, anything to fill the unbearable quiet of waiting. But the ones who grow through it, who transform through it, are those who've learned to hold their peace when nothing makes sense. Because silence in seasons of uncertainty isn't weakness, it's faith. It's the belief that clarity is coming, that pain is temporary, and that patience is more powerful than panic. I learned this kind of silence not in moments of success, but in seasons of loss. There was a time when everything I'd built seemed to collapse at once. Relationships failed, Opportunities vanished, and every door that once opened with ease suddenly slammed shut. I tried to fix it, to force it, to talk my way through it, but the more I pushed, the heavier it all became. So I did the one thing that terrified me. I stopped. I went quiet. No more desperate calls, no more explanations, no more noise, just silence. And in that stillness, something unexpected happened. The chaos didn't disappear, but my perspective did. The noise in my mind started to settle, and beneath it, there was something solid. Peace that didn't depend on answers. Strength that didn't depend on circumstances. The silence didn't take away the storm, but it taught me how to remain unshaken inside it. That's when I realized silence is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of control. The ability to feel deeply without reacting destructively. The strength to wait without losing faith. The discipline to let life unfold without forcing it to move faster than it's meant to. There's a passage I once heard that said, "In quietness and confidence shall be your strength." And it's true. Confidence isn't loud. It's not shouting or proving or performing. Real confidence is silent. It's rooted in the knowing that no matter what happens around you, you'll be okay. You've built a peace that circumstances can't steal. This kind of silence builds mental and emotional endurance. It trains your mind to slow down when everything else speeds up. It teaches you to see through the fog of fear. Because panic makes you blind, but stillness sharpens your sight. You begin to notice what matters and what doesn't. You stop reacting to every situation as if it's permanent. You start understanding that time reveals what words never could. And here's the paradox. The stronger your silence, the sharper your action becomes. Because silence doesn't mean inaction, it means preparation. When you don't waste your energy reacting emotionally, you conserve it for when it actually counts. Your movements become deliberate, your words intentional, your decisions precise. You stop living in survival mode and start operating from strategy. This is why the greatest warriors in life, in leadership, in faith, all understand silence. Before they act, they pause. Before they speak, they breathe. Before they move, they listen. They understand that silence isn't just the pause before power, it's the source of it. In a world that glorifies constant motion, silence teaches you the sacred art of still progress. It shows you that growth doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like waiting without losing your peace. Because silence isn't always passive. Sometimes it's doing the hardest work of all, holding on when everything in you wants to let go. But endurance built through silence doesn't just protect your emotions, it reshapes your mind. You start thinking differently. You stop being a slave to the highs and lows of circumstance. You start realizing that life doesn't owe you calm, you create it. Silence becomes the gym where your thoughts get stronger. Every time you choose not to react, you're lifting the weight of restraint. Every time you wait before you speak, you're building the muscle of wisdom. Every time you stand still when fear wants you to run, you're training for peace. Eventually, that training changes your entire posture toward life. You stop chasing outcomes and start mastering your inner world. You begin to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And that's when true transformation happens. Not when life gets easier, but when your spirit gets stronger. Silence, in its highest form, is not about retreat. It's about readiness. It's the space where resilience is born, where you gather your strength before the next step. It's what allows you to walk through fire without burning out, to speak less but say more, to face pressure without losing peace. And once you've tasted that kind of silence, the kind that holds you steady in storms, you can never go back to living in noise. You start craving stillness, not as a break from life, but as the rhythm of it. You learn to breathe differently, to think differently, to move differently, because silence, once mastered, becomes your shield. So the next time life pushes you into a quiet season, when nothing seems to move, when doors stay closed, when answers don't come, don't curse the silence. Listen to it. It's not punishing you, it's preparing you. It's building in you the strength that words could never give. Because one day, when the noise returns and the world demands your reaction, you'll smile quietly and unshaken, knowing that you've already won the battle most people never even fight, the battle to stay calm when everything else is collapsing. That's the power of silence, not to escape life, but to endure it beautifully, powerfully, and with peace that no storm can steal. There's a silence that doesn't just strengthen you, it creates you. The kind of silence where new ideas are born, where vision takes shape, where direction becomes clear. It's the silence of creation, the sacred space between what was and what will be. Most people think creativity comes from inspiration, from sudden bursts of brilliance, from chaos and noise. But the truth is, the most powerful creations don't come from noise. They come from stillness, from that quiet place where your thoughts stop racing long enough for something deeper to emerge. Every artist, leader, or visionary who's ever changed the world learned this truth. That silence is not a void, it's a womb. It's where ideas are conceived, nurtured, and matured before they're ready to be spoken or shared. The problem is, our world doesn't know how to sit in that womb anymore. We rush every process, demand every answer, chase every spark of inspiration until we burn it out. But the mind, like the soil, needs rest before it can produce fruit. And silence is that rest, the fertile ground where your next breakthrough begins to breathe. I remember once hitting a creative wall that felt impossible to break. No matter how hard I worked, how long I sat at my desk, how many ideas I forced, nothing flowed. My thoughts were scattered, my motivation gone. Out of frustration, I decided to stop, not to quit, but to be still. I turned off every device, left the noise of the world behind, and sat in silence for days. At first, it was uncomfortable. My mind kept screaming for distraction. But then something miraculous happened. The noise inside began to fade, and in its place came clarity, not forced clarity, organic, effortless insight. Ideas I had been chasing for months appeared out of nowhere. It was as if silence had been holding the answers all along, waiting for me to listen. That experience taught me something vital. Inspiration doesn't come when you chase it. It comes when you become still enough to receive it. The mind cannot create when it's cluttered. The spirit cannot hear direction when it's distracted. Silence becomes the bridge between confusion and creativity, the place where chaos organizes itself into order. It's not just artists who need this. Everyone does. Every decision maker, every parent, every dreamer. Because silence connects you to your inner genius, the part of you that sees beyond logic, that senses opportunity where others see obstacles. It's the silence that allows divine ideas to reach you. The voice of wisdom never competes with noise. It waits patiently for your attention. If you've ever wondered why your greatest ideas come in the shower, or on a walk, or in the middle of the night when everything is quiet, that's not coincidence. That's the natural intelligence of silence. It's your mind finally free from interference. It's the space where intuition and inspiration dance together. The most transformative leaders understand this. They build silence into their routines the way others build meetings or plans. Because they know that reflection isn't wasted time, it's sacred time. It's where strategy is born. When you step away from noise, you begin to see connections others can't. You stop reacting and start designing. You stop surviving and start creating. There's also a spiritual dimension to this creative silence. It's the moment when you stop asking for answers and start aligning with them. When you realize that sometimes prayer isn't speaking, it's listening. That the universe or God or life itself has been trying to whisper directions into your soul. But the volume of your worry has been too high. When you finally sit still long enough, you begin to hear what's been waiting for you all along. It's in this silence that vision begins to form, not through sight, but through understanding. You start sensing where you're meant to go, not because someone told you, but because your spirit recognizes it. The path ahead stops being something you figure out and becomes something you discern. And when that vision comes, it rarely shouts. It arrives like a whisper, soft but undeniable. It doesn't need to convince you, it calls you. You don't debate it, you recognize it. And that's what makes silence so powerful. It doesn't give you noise to analyze, it gives you truth to follow. The world around you will never teach you this. It will convince you that success requires constant motion, constant production, constant visibility. But real progress, the kind that lasts, comes from alignment, not acceleration. The one who learns to wait in silence moves farther than the one who rushes in noise. Because what's born in silence doesn't need to be forced. It flows naturally. Look back on history. Every major breakthrough, every shift in human understanding began in quiet contemplation. Newton under a tree, Einstein in thought, Jesus in the wilderness, prophets in solitude, poets in silence. The pattern is clear. Stillness precedes revelation. Before every great word spoken, there was a period of silence that gave it power, and that's the paradox. The most powerful things in life begin quietly. A seed buried in the ground, a thought whispered in stillness, a conviction born in prayer. The noise comes later when the fruit appears. But the creation itself, always silent. So learn to protect that sacred silence in your own life. Guard it the way you guard your goals. Because in that silence, something greater than you is trying to speak through you. Something new wants to be born. It could be an idea, a business, a calling, or a new version of yourself, but it will only emerge if you give it room. If you dare to go still long enough for the whisper to rise. And when it does, you'll know. Because true inspiration doesn't come with noise, it comes with peace. The kind of peace that says, this is it, no anxiety, no doubt, just quiet certainty. That's the gift of silence. It turns confusion into clarity, emptiness into creation, and uncertainty into direction. It's not just the birthplace of ideas, it's the birthplace of destiny.